My name is Amanda. I've tried to record this whatever. My name is Amanda. I worked for Turning Point USA and Charlie Kirk for 4 years. One of those years, I was a donor relations officer in Phoenix, Arizona. And what that means is I worked with all the donors within a certain region for all of Turning Point's assets. So Turning Point Action, Turning Point Academy, Turning Point USA, Faith, Blexit, podcasting, everything. When I saw Candace Owens' comment this morning, granted, I am not a Candace Owens fan, personally. And that comment, I felt like I had to say something. What I did for Turning Point USA within that department was some of the most... I can't even begin to describe it, because the people that I felt like I was working for were not... They were horrible. I mean, like, it was just some of the worst times ever. And I was working for such an amazing, brilliant idea of an organization, and to see it for what it really was behind the scenes, and what makes it Turning Point, which is money. I mean, I'm sorry, but it is. That's how it works in the nonprofit world. It took me so much towards the end not to tell donors to take their money elsewhere.
Wow. Hey, welcome back to Creators Media. Really appreciate everybody rolling up. Thanks so much for being here. Please let us know you're here in the comments. Smash that like button for me. If you could, subscribe if you haven't. It really helps us out with the YouTube algorithm and pushing the channel. We've got a phenomenal video for you today. I know we've covered this a little bit. We have not gone all in on the Candace Owens v. Turning Point. But obviously there's been some changes now that Turning Point basically challenged Candace Owens. They came out after a 3-month silence and said they were going to answer all of the questions. Well, they went, Blake Neff did a 10-minute diatribe on the Charlie Kirk show, which viewership is down significantly since Charlie Kirk left. No one watches that channel anymore, relatively. But anyway, they went through like 11 minutes of, supposedly answering Candace's, stipulations and her accusations. Candace had to basically, she went on her own show and did a recap of all the lies they told, of everything that they said, she said that she didn't say. And I've gone back and listened to a lot of the Candace Owens show, and she points a lot of fingers at Turning Point, but nowhere does she say that Erika Kirk was, instrumental or involved in the assassination of her husband. She doesn't even a lot of times say that Turning Point was involved. She does say that Turning Point betrayed Charlie, but she doesn't actually say that Turning Point, conspired to assassinate Charlie Kirk. No, I mean, she points a lot of fingers. There's a lot of allusions because there's a lot of questions. But now we've got even more. You saw that clip. That is a whistleblower who used to work at Turning Point USA. Now, how credible is this person? Don't know. Not really sure. But the accusations that they level, basically saying that they wanted to tell their donors, put your money elsewhere. These people are not using it right. Okay. When that first came out, it was used by everybody who supports Candace to say, look, Turning Point's awful. Of course they're lying. And it was used by other people to say, there's nothing here. But now we have actual evidence. And there's a gentleman by the name of, I believe it's Zeke DiGregorio. But anyway, he runs a channel called Wolves and Finance. We're going to dive into some of his clips because he has looked at the Turning Point USA financial disclosures as a 501c3, and they raise some serious questions. That combined with the lies that we know Turning Point has told, and the mounting evidence that says this entire Fed slop FBI narrative is nothing but a giant stage play, is making a lot of people wake up and go, wait. This is getting even worse. And it's going to get to the point where nobody buys the Fed slop. That's probably going to be a good day when nobody buys what the federal government is selling. And we all start asking our own questions. And we all want to get to the truth. That's really the goal of everything. Get to the truth. Now, I want you to check this out. Again, Wolves in Finance is the channel. Go check out his stuff. It's some excellent investigation into the Turning Point USA financials. We're going to dive into a couple of clips, and then we'll cover that. Let's go.
Charlie Kirk. There's been growing concern over potential financial mismanagement at Turning Point USA. I've been looking into this and have discovered some shocking information. I'm Zach. I'm a certified public accountant, and you are watching Wolves in Finance. Let me start off by saying that I believe this is a good organization, and I hope that they succeed. But they are not going to be able to continue Charlie Kirk's legacy.
They are a good organization in as much as, their stated goal was to go and, help turn college kids into conservatives, teach them the truth, help them understand facts. Charlie Kirk was amazing. He would debate anybody, anywhere, anytime. He would simply sit and take questions and answer them in a loving, winsome way. And he was winning people to the conservative side because they were waking up to the lies that they'd been told by the left. In that instance, yes, Turning Point is a great organization. But what you're about to find out is that the people running Turning Point, not so much.
If they are employing people who are stealing donations. The reason that people are concerned about Turning Point USA's finances is because statements made by Charlie Kirk himself. This is a memo written by Charlie Kirk on September 2nd, 2025, that is only 8 days before he was murdered. In this memo, he promotes Justin Strife as the new Chief Operating Officer, or COO, and announces a new Doge-style audit. After this memo was revealed, people obviously wanted to know what were the results of the Doge-style audit. Why was Charlie Kirk concerned with the finances of Turning Point USA right before he was murdered? Here's an exchange on X.com of someone asking that question. Why was Charlie about to audit the finances, and will it still be audited? This was responded to by someone from Turning Point named Tyler Boyer saying, "We audit our finances every year. They were just audited at the end of our fiscal year in July." He then goes on to say, "There is no scheming. Nonprofits have a 990 where everything is out front. No one owns anything, and our salaries are transparent. If you'd like a quick course on nonprofits, here is a good start." And then he links the accountinginsights.org website where they talk about the Form 990. Okay, that response by Tyler Boyer is
Now, a little bit of background. Tyler Boyer was the COO of Turning Point USA. He was fired by Charlie Kirk, replaced by Justin Strife. And that's when Charlie said, "I want a Doge audit." So Boyer, who's now back in at Turning Point, who was somehow a spokesperson now at Turning Point after he was let go as COO before Kirk's assassination, is now back in charge. That's bad.
a little bit snarky. A Doge-style audit is not the same thing as the annual financial audit, and everybody knows that. Charlie Kirk wanted a second independent audit on top of the annual financial audit. According to Tyler Boyer's post, Turning Point is not going forward with Charlie Kirk's wishes. They have canceled the audit. The question is why? Why did they?
So much for honoring Charlie Kirk's legacy. No. Oh, Charlie Kirk wanted a financial audit. He wanted a in-depth, independent scrubbing of all of the money, where it came from and where it was going at Turning Point. And as soon as he was gone, Tyler Boyer, who was fired as COO, steps in and goes, yeah, we're not doing that. No. Nothing to see here, folks.
Decide not to follow through with Charlie. A Doge-style audit is not the same thing as the annual financial audit, and everybody knows that. Charlie Kirk wanted a second independent audit on top of the annual financial audit. According to Tyler Boyer's post, Turning Point is not going forward with Charlie Kirk's wishes. They have canceled the audit. The question is why? Why did they decide not to follow through with Charlie Kirk's final wish? What is also interesting is that Tyler Boyer is the person who was replaced by Justin Strife in Charlie Kirk's memo. Tyler Boyer was the former COO of Turning Point USA from 2017. And then 8 days before Charlie Kirk was murdered, he appoints a new person as COO. Tyler Boyer steps away so he can focus more on his job as COO of their other organization, Turning Point Action. Isn't that a strange coincidence? Tyler Boyer was removed from his position in the same memo that Charlie Kirk announces a financial audit. Then after that, Charlie Kirk is murdered, and Tyler Boyer is on X.com saying that no audit is necessary.
So, one of the big questions you have to ask yourself, anytime anybody is killed, who stands to benefit? Who benefits from the death of Charlie Kirk? Now, if you're going to buy the Fed slop narrative that you've got this ridiculous Tyler Robinson, who's never really been on campus at Utah Valley State, who is essentially a trans, furry, homosexual, LGBTQ guy who decides, no, I'm going to protect my lover's honor and I'm going to go kill somebody. And then I'm going to brag about it on text so that I'm essentially going to confess. And then you start looking at the story of that and you realize, wait a minute, nothing adds up. This whole thing starts to fall apart because he had nothing to gain from Charlie Kirk's death. Tyler Robinson had nothing to gain other than hate. And that is generally not a reason that people go commit a premeditated act like this. Now, anything is possible. But with that narrative also falling apart, the fraud, the shady dealings at Turning Point USA by people like Tyler Boyer and others are now growing in their importance, in the light that they are shedding on this entire sordid affair. Now, it doesn't stop there. Check this out, because Zach goes into a little more detail on a couple of things that I want you to see on this. So he gets into a little bit more depth on what is going on with Turning Point Action and Turning Point, America's Turning Point. Check this out.
Go look at the 990 forms that Turning Point USA submits to the IRS every year. These contain their annual financial statements. When you look at the forms, there are some very strange anomalies. Several of the 990 forms are missing. Turning Point USA lists 4 related entities. There's Turning Point USA, Turning Point Endowment, Turning Point Action, and America's Turning Point. All different organizations do slightly different things. The Form 990 for fiscal year 2024 is posted for Turning Point USA, but it is missing for all the other 3 organizations.
So when Turning Point initially filed their required federal declarations as being a 501c3, they filed for the parent, but none of the subsidiaries. Those were all magically missing, and they've been missing for 5 months. Well, now they've suddenly been filed, post-dated 5 months ago. So either the IRS just failed to put them on the website, or they were filed late when everybody started asking questions.
Looks like it was never turned in. This is a massive red flag. So Tyler Boyer is being snarky on X.com and telling people to go look at the annual financial audit, but the financial audit is missing from last year for 3 of the 4 organizations. Just to show you how strange this is, if we go back 2 years to fiscal year 2023, where we have all the financial statements, We can see that in fiscal year 2023, all 4 statements were filed on the same day on 5/15/2024. That is what normally happens. On May 15th, Turning Point would file all 4 financial statements for their organizations. But for fiscal year 2024, only 1 financial statement was filed for Turning Point USA on 5/15/2025. The other 3 are missing. This strange decision to hide their financial statements happened 4 months before Charlie Kirk was murdered. I will repeat for clarity. Someone at Turning Point decided not to file 3 of the 4 of their annual financial statements 4 months before Charlie Kirk appointed a new COO, requested a new audit, and was murdered. Those 3 financial statements are still missing. Let me give you just one example of why this is problematic.
Now, they're not still missing, and we're going to get in because we're going to get into some of this information a little bit. But I want you to see what he covers first before we get into what they found when those other statements were late filed just a few days ago.
Let us look at the one financial statement we do have for fiscal year 2024 for Turning Point USA. Schedule I shows grants and other assistance to organizations, governments, and individuals in the United States. This schedule shows you where Turning Point is sending its money. We see that a lot of money, $8,560,625, is being sent to America's Turning Point. They are sending it to their own shell company. Now, this is not necessarily illegal, except for the fact that the financial statement for the other organization is missing.
It's not illegal, but it is shady. That's some shady shit right there, especially considering that America's Turning Point, Charlie Kirk, is nowhere to be found. He's not a board member. He's not an executive member. America's Turning Point was formed, and then it was sent $8.6 million, and Charlie Kirk is not a part, at least legally, on any of the filings of America's Turning Point. But you know who is? Tyler Boyer.
We cannot see how this $8.6 million is being spent. This is very important because there are strange variances around this money. I have pulled the last 5 years of 990 forms for Turning Point USA. Here is a table with contributions compared with the largest expense, which are the grants from Schedule I. You can immediately see a strange dip between 2022 and 2023. This dip happens because in prior years, they were sending money to Turning Point Endowment. They were transferring millions of dollars. This stopped in 2021, and they started ramping up sending money to America's Turning Point. Let's break this down. First of all, I find it really unethical that they were sending millions of dollars to their own endowment. I know that a lot of nonprofits do this, but I think it is unethical.
So, first of all, Turning Point takes $44 million and puts it into their own endowment and essentially invests it in the stock market. $44 million that was given by donors to support the organization to continue the work of reaching out to college students, to get people out to the polls, to get Republicans elected across the nation by young people. And they take $44 million and invest it in the stock market. Okay.
Donors know this is how Turning Point is spending their money. Turning Point USA is taking in donations and then sending the money to their endowment to invest in the stock market. In my opinion, they should be spending donations on operating their nonprofit, not on buying investments. As of fiscal year 2023, they had $61 million of assets in the endowment, which was generating $1.9 million a year of investment income. Personally, I think that's an unethical way to run a nonprofit, but that's just my opinion. But what is important here is what happened to the missing $8.6 million, the amount sent to America's Turning Point in fiscal year 2024. The amount of money sent to America's Turning Point was getting larger and larger, and because the financial statements are missing, we cannot tell how this money was spent. If we look at the prior year, the majority of the money was spent on other salaries and wages. How is this possible? when America's Turning Point reports 0 employees.
Exactly. So they're getting 8.6, before that 4.4, before that 1.1. So you're talking about 14 to $15 million that is spent on wages for a company that shows no employees. Wow, this is getting ugly. And now we've got the financial statements. We're going to dive.
Does anyone else think that sounds a little suspicious? Let me walk you through this.
All right, so we're going to stop there because I want to dive in because he goes into a little more depth once he gets the financials, because realize 5 months later, the financials showed up. They were filed with post dates on them. So now they want you to believe that the IRS just didn't post them. No, they just forgot. They posted the parent, but not the subsidiaries. I don't know what happened. Hey, they were all filed on the same day. At least that's what we want you to believe. Wrong. They wanted to hide this stuff. They wanted to hide it, and people are asking questions. They wanted everybody to buy the Fed slop, believe that Tyler Robinson just executed Charlie Kirk publicly because he didn't like trans people. This is just utter and complete nonsense. We know that Turning Point USA is lying. The question is why? Were they complicit in the death of Charlie Kirk, or are they just trying to cover up their own financial malfeasance now that everybody has put a spotlight on it? Let's keep going. Check this out.
Point is putting on their IRS form that they are sending $1.5 million to this parking lot. Well, I'm sitting here in the parking lot. The business is not here as far as I can tell. What is going on? I mean, maybe they didn't think that anyone was going to actually drive out here and check it out. But as far as I can tell, the business is not here. So my question is, do the Turning Point donors know this is how their money is being spent? That Turning Point is writing on their IRS forms that they're sending $1.5 million to this parking lot. I did some additional checking. Another thing that is strange is that there is no website for 110 LLC. 2 weeks ago.
So 110 LLC is one of the biggest subcontractors. It is the biggest subcontractor of Turning Point USA. That has to be disclosed. When you give money to another organization, to a subcontractor, to a vendor, that has to be disclosed in your 501c3 filings. Well, the largest one is 110 LLC, which is listed at an address that is not a business address. It's a strip mall. It's a strip mall with a Safeway and a Panda Express and some other things. So Zach actually goes out to this address to try to find out where $1.5 million of Turning Point USA's money went to 110 LLC, and there is no 110 LLC that he can find, at least not physically.
I posted a video about red flags at Turning Point USA. Among the many things I mentioned, Turning Point was missing 3 of the 4 990 forms for their shell companies. Well, guess what? The missing forms have mysteriously been posted, and they are marked that they were filed on May 15th, 2025. So they are claiming that they filed 4 forms, the IRS posted one, held on to the other 3, and for some reason posted them 6 months later when people started talking about it online. Isn't that convenient? But we're not going to dwell on it, because the more important thing is that now we have the missing financials. And you're not going to believe this. It gets even worse. In the 990 forms, you can go to page 8, and each organization must list out their highest paid independent contractors. What is curious is that on the FY24 form for America's Turning Point, Tyler Boyer lists himself as an independent contractor, and he puts his personal home address. Now, I'm not doxing anyone here because it is public information on the IRS form. And I have to tell people, please do not go to Tyler Boyer's house. That is not appropriate. But I will say, if you go look up his residence on Google Maps, you will see that he lives in a massive mansion. Now, I'm not going to show his home out of respect, but you can go see it for yourself. It is mind-blowing. Where is Tyler Boyer getting all this money? But what is even more important is if you go to the other shell company, Turning Point Action, In FY 2024, their number one independent contractor is a company called 110 LLC. In fact, this has been one of their largest contractors for the last 3 years. These are all the payments, and they total $1,456,261 over the last 3 years. That's almost $1.5 million. The description they provide is social, digital media, ad placement. Now, there is also an address for this company. So I thought, let's take a trip and go check this company out. If Turning Point is paying them $1.5 million, they must be doing something really great. I am on location in Queen Creek, Arizona. And if you don't know, Queen Creek is a suburb of Phoenix. So I'm at the address that was listed on the 990 form. And this is strange. This is a strip mall. So I'm going to get out. I'm going to take a walk around and see if I can find the business 110 LLC. Okay. I've walked past all the suites. I've checked all the doors. The business 110 LLC, as far as I can tell, is not here. What is going on? So Turning Point is putting on their IRS form that they are sending $1.5 million to this parking lot. Well, I'm sitting here in the parking lot. The business is not here as far as I can tell. What is going on? I mean, maybe they didn't think that anyone was going to actually drive out here and check it out. But as far as I can tell, the business is not here. So my question is, do the Turning Point donors know this is how their money is being spent? That Turning Point is writing on their IRS forms that they're sending $1.5 million to this parking lot. I did some.
Do they know that they sent $1.5 million to a parking lot? Do the donors know that $61 million has been transferred into TPUSA endowment, where it is invested in the stock market, not in the ongoing operations of reaching college and younger American voters and converting them into Republicans? Do they know that their donations are going into essentially wealth aggregation inside Turning Point? That's a good question.
Additional checking. Another thing that is strange is that there is no website for 110 LLC. How do you run a business without a website? That's pretty strange. And I thought, maybe they moved. Maybe there's a different location. But if you look it up on Google Maps, there is no location for 110 LLC. So there's no website, there's no location. Does this company actually exist? Well, we do have records that it is owned by someone named Jake Hoffman, who is actually the former communications director for Turning Point USA.
Wow. So the former communications director essentially says, yeah, I want more money. And this could be a paraphrase. This is a possibility. Decides that, wait a minute, instead of just upping a salary, why don't I form a company? I'll get Turning Point to essentially pay me to do what? Communications? Is he double dipping? Is he both the communications director and the owner of this vendor that they now send $1.5 million to? These all get very interesting.
He is now a Republican state senator in Arizona. Now, just to give you some context, Jake Hoffman is a really powerful person in Arizona, which may be why no one has talked about this before. In his financial disclosure statement, he lists that he is the owner of 110 LLC at the same address in Queen Creek. What is also curious is that on the financial disclosure form, he lists out 8 different businesses that are all operating out of that same strip mall. But what is even more strange is that on the financial disclosure form, he actually lists out the suite numbers. He claims that he is operating his business out of suites 105 to 503. Excuse me? That is every suite in the strip mall. How does that make sense? Is he operating out of the grocery store? Is he operating out of Panda Express? Is he operating his business out of the pet dental clinic? Now, if you watch my channel, you can tell that I'm a conservative. But I do not have a problem calling out a Republican if I see something that looks shady. And this is all allegedly. I don't know if anything illegal is happening for sure, Maybe there is an innocent explanation for all of this. I have never met Jake Hoffman, so I cannot speak to whether he's an ethical person or not. All I can speak to is what these people are writing in their financial forms. You have to admit that it looks pretty strange. It looks like Turning Point is sending $1.5 million to a parking lot to get picked up by a politician.
That politician being a former communications director for Turning Point. It looks like an incestuous rope-a-dope in which a former employee of Turning Point decided that they could make a lot more money by becoming a vendor to Turning Point and maybe double dipping in the process. And then when they became a politician, just kept that gravy train flowing. What it looks like is that Jake Hoffman probably owns this strip mall. And he's got eight holding companies, 8 fraudulent businesses set up that are there to essentially collect money on behalf of him and his campaign. This looks extremely shady. Let's keep going.
If you remember, Baker Tilly is the accounting firm that did the annual financial audit. So they're the ones that signed off on Turning Point. They gave it a clean audit. They said there's no problems at Turning Point. Well, Baker Tilly, did you look at the largest contract? They're supposed to do an audit procedure to make sure that it's an actual company. Well, I'm sitting here in the parking lot, I'm looking around, and I don't see a company called 110 LLC. So Baker Tilly, I want to know the specific audit procedure that you did to ensure that this was a legitimate company and not an illegal payment to a politician. In a few weeks, Turning Point is hosting their biggest event of the year, America Fest. All of your favorite content creators will be showing up in Phoenix, Arizona to give speeches. I wonder if any of these people have a problem with Turning Point sending $1.5 million to a parking lot. Are any of them going to address in their speech any of the financial concerns at Turning Point? Patrick Bet-David has one of the largest business podcasts in the world, and he has been a major contributor to America Fest. He is the business guy. Can he explain this to us? I would like to hear Patrick Bet-David give us some kind of business scenario which explains why Turning Point would send $1.5 million to a parking lot. Now, I've noticed a lot of comments suggesting that it is inappropriate for me to criticize the finances of Turning Point USA. Let me explain this for people who may not understand. Turning Point receives a tax subsidy. That is what a 501c3 is. You are paying more in taxes so that Turning Point is tax exempt.
Okay, so probably won't go through the tax implications. However, I do want to get back to, because he addresses again the $8.6 million that went to America's Turning Point, a subsidiary of Turning Point USA that is not owned, controlled, or set up by Charlie Kirk. No, his name's nowhere on it. It's set up by Tyler Boyer, the fired COO, the one who was replaced by Jack Strife, who then Charlie said, I want a Doge-style audit. I want to uncover every dime, where it came from, where it's going. So let's check that out. And welcome in, Resnap. Thanks so much for being here. Really appreciate you rolling up. Better late than never. Thanks so much. Really appreciate you. Here we go.
Questions about Turning Point's financials. If you think they look shady, you are absolutely justified in demanding answers. The other thing I mentioned in my last video was the missing $8.6 million that was transferred from Turning Point USA to America's Turning Point. Now we have the finances so we can see how that money was spent. Just to recap, there are 4 shell companies. Turning Point USA is the main one. Then we have Turning Point Action, America's Turning Point, and Turning Point Endowment. Just as a reminder, Tyler Boyer is the only paid executive listed for America's Turning Point. Charlie Kirk is not even listed. So it seems strange to me that in FY24, $8.6 million mysteriously got transferred out of the main company into the shell company managed by Tyler Boyer. When we look at how this money was actually spent,
before Tyler Boyer was fired, somehow somebody made the decision that, America's Turning Point, which has nothing to do with Charlie, needs to get $8.6 million from Turning Point USA, which was bringing in all the money.
It went mainly to salaries. And in the last video, I mentioned the possibility of ghost employees. This is when an organization pays people, records it as salary expense when those people do not actually work for the business. So I want to drill down into this idea further. Now, I have to admit that salary information can be notoriously hard to analyze because people are constantly coming and going from an organization. For instance, you could get a bunch of people hired in the last month of the year. Those kind of timing issues can cause strange fluctuations in your expenses, but you would expect the overall trends to make sense. You would expect the numbers to be within a certain range that is realistic. For America's Turning Point in FY24, we see that for the first time, they report 24 employees. This number is reported on a calendar year, and the expenses are reported on a fiscal year ending on 6/30. So let's stagger these out. If their 990 forms are correct, and they had 0 employees in calendar year 2022, that means that the entire salary expense for FY23 was related to the first 6 months of calendar year 2023. They spent $3.7 million in 6 months on salaries. In my opinion, these numbers are a bunch of baloney. The math does not work. Let's use the most favorable assumptions for America's Turning Point and assume that this expense was spread out across the largest number of employees. If we assume that 24 employees were hired on January 1st and worked for 6 months, that means that the average annual salary of those 24 employees was around $300,000. That's a lot of money. That is every employee at America's Turning Point. It could be the secretary. I would like to know what that secretary is doing that they get a salary of $300,000. I would like to ask the other employees at the other shell companies at Turning Point. Are you all making $300,000 a year? Because according to the financials, somebody is. Now, we don't know this for sure, these are just assumptions, but I am telling you that this is catching my eye as a red flag because these are astounding numbers for a nonprofit. $8.6 million mysteriously gets transferred into the shell company managed by Tyler Boyer, and it is spent on this massively inflated salary expense. Again, maybe there is some kind of innocent explanation for
I highly doubt it. I highly doubt there is an innocent explanation. They have been transferring $60 million into Turning Point Endowment. They have now transferred, prior to fiscal year 24, they transferred $5.5 million into America's Turning Point when they had basically 0 employees. Where did that $5 million go? Then they transferred 8.6. 3.7 was spent on salary expense for 24 people, making $300,000 a year. Who are these people? This sounds very much like a money laundering scheme. They are laundering money out of Turning Point USA into America's Turning Point. Because when you look at the donations that came in, all of the donations come into Turning Point USA. And their donations have gone up year over year. But between 23 and 24, they only increased 4% when they had been averaging 20+% year over year. And wait a minute, where did the discrepancy go? Went right into America's Turning Point, run by Tyler Boyer, run by the man who was fired as COO because Charlie Kirk started looking at these financials and saying, wait a minute, something is off here. And he fired him and called for a Doge-style audit. And just days later, Charlie Kirk is assassinated. Now, what we're seeing here is what very much looks like, alleged, very much looks like rampant financial fraud at Turning Point USA, which corresponds, by the way, if you looked at those dates, June of 24, what's happening? What's happening in the world in June of 24? Oh, that's right. Trump runs away with the Republican nomination for president. Everybody else is forced to exit. Finally, Nikki Haley is forced to walk away. And all of a sudden, you've got a bunch of establishment, big donor Republicans who have now 0 control over the Trump administration and over MAGA and over the direction of the Republican Party. And what looks very shady is that suddenly they decided, wait a minute, we've got to figure out a way to get our paws on the control of MAGA and how best to do it, but through someone like Tyler Boyer, where they can input a bunch of money into Turning Point USA, input their own people into Turning Point USA, and they can use that to essentially abscond with MAGA. But that doesn't work if Charlie Kirk's around, because TPUSA, Turning Point, is Charlie Kirk's baby, and he's not going to let it become an arm of the Republican establishment or the donor class. But if Charlie's out of the way, the mice can play. That's what I'm seeing here. Let me know what you think in the comments. Hey, I really appreciate it rolling up. We got a follow-up story to this because we know that TPUSA has been lying about their financials. We just saw it with Zach DeGregorio and Wolves and Finance. But there are other lies being told by Turning Point and by representatives of Turning Point, and I want to dive into those next. So before we do that, please smash that like button, subscribe, turn on the notifications if you would, please. And let's dive into more lies by Turning Point. All right, we did a video a couple weeks ago or a week ago where we talked about the facts that we know about the Charlie Kirk assassination. The facts that have no answers, that aren't part of the Fed slop narrative. Like what happened, like where were the Egyptian military aircraft? What were they doing in America when they overlapped with Erika and Charlie Kirk 79 times? Statistically impossible. What happened to, why were some of the people acting so strangely on the day of Charlie Kirk's murder? Why was the venue where he was murdered suddenly renovated, paved over, rehabbed within days of the assassination? Why was there no real autopsy? This is all getting very, very shady. And I want to dive in because we now have confirmation of lies told by Turning Point representatives, specifically about the drones. And then I have some new evidence because we've talked about the 30-6, but finally somebody has posted a video that I think makes it very easy for a layman to understand why the idea that Charlie Kirk was shot by a 30-6 bullet from a high-powered rifle and there is no exit wound is complete and utter garbage. Let's check this out. Everybody remembers Harpole. And I highly recommend you go watch, I believe Candace's latest video talks about a whistleblower that she found that is part of the military. He was part of the military 35 years ago when they uncovered essentially members of the military being part of, being paid by the cartels and stuff that he was doing back then. And he came across a meeting at which he thinks this gentleman was present 3 days before Charlie Kirk was assassinated with other military members. But anyway, this is the former head of security for Turning Point USA, specifically responsible for security on September the 10th when Charlie Kirk was killed at Utah Valley State. And he says, we couldn't fly drones. Check this out.
Ryan Harpole.
Where are our risks? It's a risk assessment when we come in. That's why we get there. That's why we start doing the advance so early. We walk it, we build it ourselves. And so initially, I spent thousands of dollars on drones last year and got the guy's license. But if the area lies in the Provo, Utah airspace, I can't fly it. That's a 107B. We can't break the rules. Right. And then you had secondary restrictions, probably due to heavy foot traffic for the school. But I can't go in and break the rules.
So is he telling the truth? Do you see the tells?
Here, and got the guy's license. But if the area lies in the Provo, Utah airspace.
It's like a little bit of a slur there. Airspace. Language experts can opine here if adapters are being used. But I think that these narratives contradict each other just by itself means that the FBI should be involved.
So I don't want to get into this gentleman's comment, but we know that Harpole said, I could not fly drones. I was not allowed. There were no drones in the air. So, of course, we couldn't see Tyler Robinson on the roof. That also begs the question, you as head of security, why didn't you send somebody up on the roof? Why didn't you hire 3 people and send them up on the roof? Well, because the sheriff said he was going to handle it. You are responsible for security. You were paid. The sheriff was not paid. You were paid to be responsible for Charlie Kirk's security. You did not fly drones because you claimed you weren't allowed. You did not put people up on the roof because you claim the sheriff said he would handle it. No. Your responsibility. But now we know that Harpole is absolutely lying out his butt. He is full of sugar honey iced tea. That's right. He is an absolute liar. How do we know? Because check this out from Frank Turek.
So we drove in, and as we were driving in, Charlie got some video footage from drones above. This is an hour before it was supposed to start.
Back up here.
Really,
just so you know, this is Frank Turek talking in an interview with Megyn Kelly. Here we go.
look, Charlie didn't really like the word safe. He knew that ministry required you to take risks.
So we drove in, and as we were driving in, Charlie got some video footage from drones above. This is an hour before it was supposed to start, and there were thousands of people there. And I'm looking at the video footage, and I go, Charlie, I don't like this place. There's too many buildings. But Charlie, knowing that the people wanted to interact, and being brave that as he was, he just kind of shrugged it off.
He told these people, I think they're going to kill me. Okay. He did not express that to me. So I am telling you this based off the testimony of 3 people. And I am saying this because I hope that these people who those conversations I had, that is rising, you know, they tell us.
I think that's the wrong clip. Hold on one sec. So, because Frank Turek actually debunks this whole thing. So check this out. I'll pull this from the Jimmy Dore show. Because he had this, but I thought I had the actual clip. But we'll just have to pull it from the Jimmy Dore show. All right, right here.
There's laws for a reason.
So we're driving in, Megyn, and his team has drones up, looking at the crowd from above, and they text him some video. And there's thousands of people there an hour before the start. And I said, Charlie, I don't like this place. There's too many buildings.
That's why they don't.
So you've got Harpole saying, I wasn't allowed to fly drones. You've got Frank Turek, who everything I've known about Frank Turek tells me he's an honest broker. Now, he's been attacking Candace, which I don't agree with. But everything he said up until this point makes him seem like an honest broker. He's basically saying, no, there were drones in the air. I saw the footage. Well, we don't even have to just take his word for it. Check this out, because there's now been posted footage of the day of Charlie Kirk's assassination from Utah Valley State taken by a drone. Check this out. So now we know that Frank Turek was absolutely telling the truth, that there were drones in the air, that they could have then received a video feed from the drones that both he and Charlie Kirk looked at that is in direct contradiction of Harpole's I wasn't allowed to fly drones. I didn't want to fly drones. I didn't want to send people on the roof. This whole thing just smacks of a setup. Now, the last thing I want to talk about today
some video
is
footage from drones above.
The whole nonsense with the bullet.
To start, and there
the
were
magic
thousands
bullet.
of people there. And I'm looking.
Right? So I finally found a video that I think makes it really simple to understand what's going on with a 30-06 bullet and why this idea that there's no exit wound, that Charlie Kirk's ate so many carrots that his spine stopped the bullet. But even though the spine stopped the bullet, he's not blown off the chair. He just kind of falls over. This whole thing is nonsense. Check this out. I think this video is a great layman's introduction into why the idea that he was shot with a 30-06 bullet, and we get the video that we get, and we get his body movement that we get, why all of that is absolute and complete balderdash, why it is nonsense. Check this out.
In this video, we'll be running an 80 grain EODX 22 Creedmoor, 178 grain EODX 30-6, and 150 grain FMJ 30-6. All right, so here's our setup. We got the pork shoulder, which is about 4.5 inches thick. We got this taped to a piece of steel. So instead of trying to do a video where we got another bone behind it or something else, we're going straight steel. We got the pork shoulder, we got the steel, and then we got these 2 liters behind it, because we're gonna be 150 yards away when we take this shot. So we do a shot with the 30-06, and we got another one set up here. We'll do a shot with the 22 Creedmoor. So if the 22 Creedmoor blows through this, and we get an exit wound, there's no way that we wouldn't get an exit wound from a 30-06. So we're set up back at 150.
So you've got a 4-inch pork shoulder, which simulates the flesh of the neck. Now, instead of a bone, they put an actual 1/4-inch steel plate behind it, and then 2 soda bombs. Check this out.
Take these shots, see what happens. Here's a closer look at the rounds we'll be using for this test. Be sure to stick around to the end of the video, because that's when we'll show the damage from the 22 Creedmoor. Up first is the 178 grain EODX round 30-6.
So here's your 30-06 bullet. It blows through the pork.
Here's our pork shoulder, completely
rips it
ripped
apart.
through. Yep, it just blew straight through the neck, in air quotes. And our spine, our piece of steel, it blew right through that, and we know it blew through because we got an exit wound on the 2 liters. So again, we got our pork shoulder, which represents our neck, and then we have a real piece of steel, not a Charlie Kirk's nickel steel. It blew through the real piece of steel. Then it went through a 2 liter. We know that because we got an exit wound on the 2 liter. All right, next we'll take a shot with the 150 grain.
I think they do this one in slow motion. So here we go. So both 30-06 bullets go completely through the neck, rip it apart. They do a through and through on a 1/4-inch plate steel, and then produce an exit wound out the back of a 2-liter bottle. Now, I want you to think of the videos that you have seen of Charlie Kirk's assassination and try to square that with, this is a 30-06 bullet. Heck no. There is no way you get the video that you get of Charlie Kirk if he was shot by a 30-06 from a high-powered rifle from a down angle. It is absolutely not happening. There is no reason to buy the Fed slop. We know that Harpole's lying. We know that they're lying about the bullet. We now know that there are serious financial irregularities at Turning Point USA, that Charlie's death suddenly canceled the Doge audit, which might have uncovered all of this stuff. So the question you have to ask yourself, who benefits from the death of Charlie Kirk? Right now, I can tell you that it very much looks like one of the people that benefits is Tyler Boyer. Some of the other people that benefit, Andrew Colvett, Blake Neff, but certainly Tyler Boyer. Now, these are all allegations. Nothing has been proved, but I, for one, welcome Candace Owens asking questions. Is she casting a lot of dispersion to people? Yes. Maybe there's a, maybe she could be a little more circumspect than that. But right now, for somebody who's grieving for their friend and asking questions because they're not getting any of the answers out of the feds or from the people involved who are actually clearly lying to everybody, I have no problem. There needs to be a lot of questions asked because we need to get to the truth. What happened? Who actually did this and why? Same thing with the attempted assassination of President Trump, which It seems the FBI is just burying all that. Nothing to see here, just a lone shooter. I'm not buying any of this garbage. I don't know about you. Let me know what you think in the comments. Daisy Lady, absolutely. Trump pardoned Boyer having to do with the election fraud, which links this back to the administration in ways that I don't even want to think about. But we need to get to the truth of this. Again, let me know what you think in the comments. I really appreciate everybody rolling up. Remember, God is good and he is sovereign. He will not be mocked. He knows exactly what's going on. God sees all. What we try to keep in the dark will be exposed in the light. And that's what we need to happen. So again, remember, he is sovereign. It'll all be good in the end. Until I catch you next time, have a great day.